I'm a conscious empath and a master Reiki practitioner, and I'm creating this first video interview with my good friend David Sloan. And our topic today is Bohemian Woman Rising, diving deep into inner earth ETs. But before we go there, I want to just introduce David. I'm just going to read directly from his bio, so just bear with me. David is a self-acknowledged starseed wanderer. He had awakened to his mission roughly 10 years ago. He is an avid researcher of esoteric knowledge, including ET and UFO phenomenon, the suppression of advanced technologies, the secrecy surrounding breakaway civilizations and secret space programs, the occult and related background of elite families, and most importantly, the nature of consciousness and spirituality. David also researches geopolitics, global economics, and current events related to disclosure. His background education includes a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration from Fordham University, a Master's in Business Administration and BA from Seton Hall University, and an EMT Emergency Medical Technician certification that allows him to provide basic life support in emergency settings through a local volunteer rescue squad. His professional history includes 10 plus years in sales, 2+ years as a federal air marshal, 5+ years as a volunteer EMT, 1 year as a vice president of a local volunteer rescue squad, and 1 year going on 2 years as president of the same volunteer rescue squad. David has a YouTube channel called Road to Disclosure that is still in its infancy stage, but he plans to reestablish in the near future along with a website of the same name. So welcome, David.
Thank you, Sheila. Glad to be here.
I'm excited that you're here because, as I mentioned before, I've been waiting with bated breath for more Road to Disclosure content. ET, ufology is one of my great passions, but you are so well versed on the topic, so I'm just excited that you're here. But before we jump into the interview, no, thank you. Before we jump into the interview specifically, I want to mention folks can learn more about Bohemian Woman Rising by going to bohemianwomanrising.com or YouTube or Facebook. So before we talk about inner earth ET specifically, I wanted to ask you a few questions that hopefully offer some background and historical context for folks.
Sure.
So what is disclosure?
Disclosure to me, because a lot of this stuff just based off of my research is just going to be really my opinion. Even though I gather sources from all over the place to kind of give me my own understanding of what's going on. Disclosure to me is the release of secreted or occulted information or knowledge, let's say of humanity's true past. Mm-hmm. It's also the release of the suppressed advanced technologies that have been acquired, whether through backwards engineering or treaties acquired, this technology acquired through treaties with different extraterrestrial races or ancient human races. Mm-hmm. And obviously informing the general public of what's really going on the planet Earth, because a lot of the information is not well known, particularly because of the suppression and the ridicule behind it.
Right.
The term, I'd say most of the truth-seeking community that we're both a part of, mm-hmm. we don't like the term conspiracy theorists because it's a derogatory term. Obviously, it stems from time when people were questioning the truth, particularly when after the JFK assassination, mm-hmm. I believe the CIA coined the term conspiracy theorist to discredit those that would want to question the official statement or official truth that came out from, let's say, the government at that time. Mm-hmm. So I prefer the term truth seeker more than anything else. Mm-hmm. And so those of us that consider ourselves truth seekers are making an effort to make others aware, awaken mm-hmm. others, as we say, mm-hmm. On this path to disclosure.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So in your opinion, what's the danger of suppressing this, this disclosure? What's the potential harm to humanity?
I would say it's more associated with the evolution, or more aptly named the ascension of, let's say, the human race, or the spirit of the human race. A lot of science is now becoming more mainstream in the idea of consciousness, and being a real thing. The essence, essentially, of every living creature is consciousness, spirituality, spirit, or soul. So that the nature of consciousness, the ability to raise your vibration to higher states of consciousness, is something we can all reach. And there's been a suppression of this truth of our potential, particularly because certain entities, whether they're human or otherwise, don't want the rest of us evolving. So that's my understanding, is the suppression of a lot of this is to keep the majority of us, in essence, enslaved to this hierarchy that exists.
And so, and then in your opinion, why don't they want us to realize or awaken to this knowledge about?
I mean, that there's probably a multitude of reasons. One of the stronger reasons is based around who these, you could call them elites. I don't think they're all of an elite status, but let's just use that term. These elites, they obviously follow a specific ideology where they feel that they're superior to us, and that they are meant to control us. Like, that's their specific religion. A lot of people call it Luciferian, satanic type of religion, that they follow a specific set of rules, and they truly believe that they are meant to enslave the population, particularly, let's say, here on Earth, that we're not capable of taking on the responsibility of whatever they define as raising our vibration to higher states of consciousness. They may not think that we can, but obviously there's a lot of effort to suppress the energies associated with ascension, particularly when it comes to chemicals that we ingest, the medicine we take, frequencies that we're exposed to. So all these things lower our vibration. Hence the reason these elites are controlling us in that fashion. So they obviously don't want us ascending. There might be some kind of belief system that has been exposed to the general public through some of the, let's say, the cabal factions, these elites factions, that go into why they're doing it. I think the nature of this deals with duality, the idea that, at least in this physical 3D universe, the existence of light and dark, good and evil. I like to actually associate it more with service to self and service to others orientations. It's less subjective. But that there's a reason, let's say, these negative elites are here. And I think from a particular standpoint, from, let's say, their standpoint, they may think that they're doing a service by being negative, by allowing growth to occur, by taking on that role. I've gone into some research regarding that. I think the most pertinent source that I actually utilized recently was Richard Enos. He wrote an article. It was like a 5 or 6 part article on some of this information. He used the Law of One book series, channeled information, as well as testimony from an insider, I believe it was called The Hidden Hand or something thereof, a derivative thereof, and acknowledging that there's the term Illuminati, or the dark cult, top echelons of power. There's both like a human element and then an ET element, and they say there's essentially different roles associated with these, both the human element of the Illuminati as well as the ET, the Illuminati. So I don't think we can necessarily pinpoint the exact reason, because I think there's a multitude of them, but that's I'd say the fact that they probably think they're doing a service to aid in the ascension process,
Right.
whether they're acting positively or negatively.
Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But I think the elite are also probably afraid. There's an element of fear as well. You know, everyone waking up. It's going to happen anyway, but you know,
Right.
there's an
I think
element
everybody, most of us agree that the nature of this awakening, this raising of consciousness happens. I think it happens cyclically. So it happens every, let's say, 25,920 years, or
wow.
you know, whatever time period somebody wants to
Oh,
acknowledge based off of the research. But let's say every roughly 26,000 years we go through this cyclical change, or the Earth goes through it, and it allows or aids in the ascension process. So
awesome.
certainly the elites are fearful of losing the control they have, because maybe that's all they've ever known. So
Yeah.
you kind of get conditioned regardless of who you are,
Right.
and entrenched in a belief system, and they obviously are fearful of giving that control or power up. So
Times are changing.
they are.
So how did you? Okay. This is a kind of a big question. Lead up to the question, I should say.
Sure.
In terms of setting aside what we're told our souls come from, that's sort of like the context. Like, yes, we are physically born on this world, but I like to leave room for the concept or idea that maybe humans were seated here, not exactly just our physical bodies were born here, but where does the soul come from? Kind of. So that's sort of like where I'm coming from with this next question.
Okay.
There are those who say humans were seeded to planet Earth, that we didn't evolve from primates via the elusive missing link, or what some evolutionary biologists call the last common ancestor. So considering the above statement, do you think our missing parents could be extraterrestrial? I mean, like, yeah. So, you know, there's this whole discourse in the science community about so-called junk DNA. They say they're unable to identify it. So that's one mystery. The Bible has been revised who knows how many times. Lost truths. And then carbon dating is not an exact science. So taking all of that into consideration, in my opinion, I like to leave the door open to the fact that maybe humans, while our bodies are physically born here, our soul comes maybe from some ET involvement. There's a missing piece of our history, and I think it's tragic that ufology is suppressed, because I think there's some truth, there's some information, that we're missing in terms of inserting ufology into our human history, in terms of where we may come from.
Certainly, with the disclosure process, people are going to have to integrate new information into their belief systems. So I think, particularly with let's say the ET disclosure, I mean, in terms of origins of souls or consciousness, I mean, this is highly opinionated. I don't think anyone can specifically say they know exactly. Well, I mean, everyone has their understanding of what, like, the term God is to them.
Right.
I call it source,
Right.
sometimes creator. So obviously, I think we all originate from the idea that we're all one mind, one consciousness. So we are all essentially one and the same, from my perspective, from my understanding. But how we have this individuality, this unique expression of self, stems from the idea that Source decided to divide itself up to go through a multitude, an infinite amount of different experiences.
Right.
And so souls or consciousness comes from, let's say, that source. A lot of people, I think, that I've followed, acknowledge that some of this stuff comes from, like they'll say, the galactic center, the galactic sun,
Mm-hmm.
And the Milky Way
Mm-hmm.
galaxy, like that could be essentially defined as one source of
Mm-hmm.
source or of
Right.
God.
Right.
Um, and that obviously bodies are just vessels.
Mm-hmm.
Physical bodies are just vessels for your soul, for your consciousness to reside in, to experience this physical 3D world, so that you're having a unique individual experience
Mm-hmm.
that you can use to kind of grow and cycle back to source, and then
Mm-hmm.
source is gaining that insight, that knowledge itself.
Right.
Um, I mean, that's kind of a simplistic version of what I believe.
Mm-hmm.
How you can prove that is difficult. I mean, a lot of people would say that they maybe on a metaphysical basis where like certain information is downloaded to them through
Right.
source or through a higher conscious being. I certainly think that's possible, but to kind of validate it might be a little bit difficult. So everyone
Right.
should just come to their own conclusion, feel what resonates with them most, and believe that. But
Fair
certainly
enough.
my understanding is that we all essentially come from the same source. We are that source. The idea of religion, or let's say more importantly, divinity,
Mm-hmm.
uh, because the majority of the Earth's population kind of separates itself from the divine, I think is wrong, because it obviously doesn't empower us. I
Mm-hmm.
think if we recognize that we are part of source at all times, there's no separation. That like that divine spark that we usually relegate to a divine entity, like let's say Jesus Christ. That divine
Mm-hmm.
spark is in every single one of us. So
I
in
agree.
essence, we are all God. We just, let's say, haven't reached that
Yes.
potential yet
Yes.
because we're still growing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Our potential is being blocked in so many ways
right.
by our climate issues, our food, our healthcare,
Yeah,
their our belief systems. So,
definitely.
but we're never disconnected. It may
Right.
be, it might feel muted, but we're never disconnected. So
Right. Sometimes
I
numbed. Yeah, certainly our connection to each other or source. I
yeah.
think a big practice that a lot of people are recognizing is meditation. If they go into a deep
Oh,
meditative state, they
yes.
feel things that they've never felt before, and
I
that gives them
agree.
more of a innate or inherent understanding of how connected we all are.
Yes, I agree. Um, okay, who do you think inhabited Earth first, humans or extraterrestrials?
I think civilization is much, much older than
Yes.
than let's say mainstream science
Mhm.
gives us credit for, but also even some of the um, alternative sources, even within the truth seeking community. I think, I mean, there's always information coming out, new information that we can all pretty much assess and make for our own conclusions.
Mhm.
My understanding is that let's say if you go with the nature of, let's say, the Earth being roughly 4 billion years old, universe being 13.7 billion years old, so there is, let's say, a timeline. And certain whistleblowers and
Mhm.
insiders have come out and said our solar system has actually been seeded with life for billions of years, just not necessarily sentient life on planet Earth.
Yeah.
Um, so, I mean, if you look at the exploded planet hypothesis, suggesting the asteroid belt was a super Earth at one point, and I think the timeline associated with that, the most favored timeline, is roughly 500,000 years ago.
Mm.
So that it exploded, and then obviously life decided to
Mhm.
go to emigrate to different parts of the solar system
Mhm.
from that disaster. Certainly, Earth was one of those places. I do understand that most, and it makes sense to me that most planetary bodies go through cataclysms over
Mhm.
the course of time. So that most civilizations will actually go underground to protect themselves uh,
Uh,
over
mhm.
the course of whether it's thousands, tens of thousands of years. So I do believe there's, and this is the idea of the inner Earth civilizations. Um, let's say in our more recent history, I mean, you look at Atlantis, you look at Lemuria, these potentially these races or civilizations inhabited Earth anywhere from, like, let's say 10,000 years ago to 50,000 years ago.
Mhm.
I'd say that that's certainly reminiscent of some of the archaeological sites that have been uncovered, whether under the surface of the water or
Right.
On the surface of the planet.
Right.
I'd say there's many theories associated with different races that existed, whether it was a race before the ancient Egyptians, whether it was a race before the ancient Sumerians, who they prayed to, the information, the ancient text associated with, let's say, ancient Sumeria, cuneiform tablets associate the understanding that there was a race of beings called the Anunnaki that existed, that potentially seeded human life, or at least tinkered with DNA so much so that they created a slave race. I think some people probably suggest that might have happened 50,000 years ago. My understanding is it happened roughly 270,000 years ago. But I do think there's obviously much, much older civilizations that existed on Earth since then. But that's certainly where my understanding is that the current Homo sapiens sapien human form is where it originated from, let's say, that tinkering of DNA, the genetic manipulation of DNA from the Anunnaki. And I think subsequent, since that time period, you've had a number of what they call genetic farmer races, different extraterrestrial races, come in and maybe mess with that DNA as well, to create, let's say, different subspecies, or maybe not a Homo sapien race, maybe whether it was the Neanderthal, Homo erectus, whatever different kind of humanoid species that existed that are no longer present on the surface. Certainly were, from my point of view, species that were tinkered with. Whether they certainly, you can stem from like an original animal species. Obviously, most of us believe that we came from apes, and I think that is accurate enough. But again, I think so much genetic manipulation went on that when you suggested like the junk DNA, I think junk DNA is just a kind of a term used to hide the fact that we have a lot of
Agreed.
DNA that's not originated from the planet.
Nothing to see here.
Nothing to see. If that information came out, then it would change how science thinks of human origins. I think there's a number of theories out there, but certainly the one that I gravitate towards the most is the genetic manipulation or tinkering by different ET races.
Yeah. Well, for me, with my layperson's understanding of this whole thing, early on in my ufology research, I read on some scientific website, this was some years ago, that I've always understood that the galaxy that Earth resides in is vast. We can't probably comprehend how big it is and how many stars and planets. We're always discovering new planets or stars.
Right.
But there are multiple galaxies of this magnitude. So in my humble opinion, layperson opinion, someone was here way before us here on this planet. Somebody came way before our humans. That's how I'm connecting those dots. Any thoughts on that?
You're saying specifically Earth?
Yeah, I mean, well, no, they've been I believe extraterrestrials are everywhere, and in the galaxies,
right.
which draws me to the conclusion that in my opinion, they were here prior to humans on Earth.
So I mean, certainly life coming from different parts of, let's say, the galaxy, or even just within our own solar system, I think is a valid hypothesis or valid conclusion to come to, depending on what research one has done. In terms of just life itself, let's say we're not even talking about intelligent life or sentient life. Let's just talk about microbial life or plant animals. I think that certainly could have been started through a number of means. The idea that life could have been inhabiting parts of a comet, and the comet crash lands on the planet, and life starts to evolve from that point. So I think that's certainly a big factor in how I think that the scientific term is panspermia. I think panspermia, seeding life onto planet Earth from, let's say, a comet.
Very cool.
But the nature of, let's say, intelligent life and the development or evolution, I think most of researchers out there who I've read about suggest that the human evolution has happened too fast. Let's say we evolved from apes, and whether you deal with the missing link or not, the idea of how fast we've evolved, let's say within the last even 50,000 years, has been substantial to the point where it almost doesn't. I think this is also part and parcel why most people believe in intelligent design through let's say God. Within the last, I think, 6,000 years, for most people that are Christians, believe what the Bible says. But in terms of intelligent, sentient life on this planet, the Homo sapiens sapien version of us, we've certainly evolved to a point now that might, through genetic mutations, random genetic mutations, would have taken much longer than the understanding of how long Homo sapiens have been around. So yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that there's been some kind of advanced race, let's say, that decided to mess with the DNA of certain inhabitants on the planet to create what we are now. That might explain why they think that certain races, whether they're human or ETs, think that they have some kind of the control mechanism. They have some kind of ownership status associated with, like, the human race. They own us, and we're their slaves, or like in some cases the term watchers. That they're here looking out for us, but obviously they're still suppressing our growth, whether that's spiritually or physically. So life has certainly been around for a while. Plus, to even integrate the idea of, let's say, time travel, recognizing how old, let's say, a certain advanced race is, more than likely they've mastered the idea of how, the nature of space-time. So let's say time travel is real. A lot of people in the truthing community, particularly because of the testimony of someone like Corey Goode, recognizing parts of the inner Earth civilizations that exist, the Anshar in particular. A lot of people believe or speculate that they are us just from our future, but ended up time traveling back, I think roughly 17 to 18 million years ago, to essentially aid us in our current ascension process now. So there's a lot of different ideas or theories or beliefs out there. I am one to usually. I mean, everyone should believe what resonates with them. For me, I'll certainly listen to a specific idea or theory, and then if I share a lot of the information because of my own belief systems, and I think everyone's belief systems should certainly not stay stagnant. It should change over time, because you grow, so should your belief system.
Agreed.
And so in that sense, you never stop seeking truth. You never stop learning. But unfortunately, most people kind of stay stagnant, and they because they're comforted by, let's say, it's tradition.
It's entrainment.
It is.
I think
Conditioning, certainly a level of control in that sense. So I'd say for myself, what I believe is that there's both good and bad races, and some of them kind of tinker with our DNA a little too much. Some people I think on the planet, part of the reason that abductions let's say abductions occur is because from what I understand, certain ET races almost want to, so they'll take people that might have specific genetic disposition that's associated with the ET's own genetic makeup. So they will actually take people that are very closely similar to their own genetic makeup, and then I guess through whatever tinkering they do, or trying to improve upon that genetic makeup, or just to, let's say, get samples to kind of advance their own programming. Because I'd say that the nature of why Earth is so important is because it can harbor so vast amounts of life forms. I think that was that's the crux of why there's so many different species. There's I mean, if you look at the octopus, I believe in scientific terminology, they don't even know where the octopus originated from. They don't have a starting point as to where that life form came from. And so a lot of people believe it's not from this planet. Yeah, so I think the nature of Earth being able to sustain life of all sorts makes her special, Gaia special. And then what makes humanity special, which is why there's so many different advanced races here, even tinkering with us, is because the nature, I think, of in this physical 3D environment, creating the perfect vessel for ascension is a lot of the different races' goals. Their biggest is to create a vessel that allows the spirit to ascend at the highest, fastest possible rate. And so whether that's, humans, current Homo sapiens, because we can kind of we have so many different emotions, we have so many different how we kind of focus our mental attention to specific things, being able to grow without being suppressed. Obviously, that might show some the nature of ascension and the nature of ascending to higher states of consciousness. The quickly a spirit or soul can raise their vibration would certainly be one way to test that theory. And I think a lot of ET races go about their experiments on Earth that way. So they're testing to see whether they're influencing it or not. And I think a lot of them are. Determining it how they can ascend that much faster, create the perfect almost.
I agree with that. So I'm reading this book. The Pleiadian Agenda, A New Cosmology for the Age of Light, by Barbara Clow. She channels the Pleiadian ETs. And I understand from what they're saying, the Pleiadians, that the Earth was created as a living, loving library. It was supposed to be the apex of all things love and light and beauty. And we humans were seated here along with all other life forms, and that there was a certain faction of ET that wanted the planet for themselves. But that's just another story. But I think it ties into what you were just saying about the interest within the ET population as Earth goes.
Right.
So,
yeah, I think there's certainly a number of agendas going on, and certainly they're not all. Maybe there's a few alliances, tenuous alliances or not. I think everybody has a specific agenda. Some I don't think are even associated with humans. I think there's a lot of different life forms on the planet that are being monitored or watched or tinkered with. It's not just humans, but we're certainly the dominant species on the planet right now, at least on the surface.
On the surface.
Yeah.
I guess that's the tragedy of a revisionist history. I mean, just with regard to ufology, I'm not even talking about human history. Will we ever know the truth? That with all these factions, with their agendas, it's a lot to piece together and try to make sense of it.
Absolutely.
I kind of think is this so? ET interest and Earth, is it benevolent or malevolent? Malevolent, in your opinion, or something in between?
Um,
Mix thereof.
my understanding is that there's both good and evil, or malevolent and benevolent. I'd say the majority is good or benevolent. Some people, I think, David Wilcock has acknowledged, whether it was through the Law of One series or not, through Raw, the channeled information. I think they say like 95%, or let's say 90% is benevolent. So there's only a very small amount that are negative.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly through the idea of raising your consciousness to ascend to different states of consciousness. The idea is to be as service to others oriented as possible. But you certainly could suggest that the nature of reality, this physical 3D universe, duality exists. So there's a reason for both. Light and dark are supposed to be there to complement each other. And I really think that's the only way you grow, is if you actually
I
have
agree
both
with
to
that.
learn from.
I agree with
So
that.
definitely there's ET races that are negative or malevolent. I think the majority of control that exists stems from these malevolent beings. What universal law kind of suggests, that if you are negative, you kind of pay the price for, let's say, interfering with the free will of others. And in the case of karma, so I think a lot of these negative ETs kind of have mastered the idea of manipulating our free will.
Right.
So much so that obviously they team up with, they partner up with some of the humans that exist on the planet as well. Let's say the elites who summon them from whatever way. A lot of people recognize that a lot of these negative ETs are interdimensional, so they can be summoned from, let's say, the astral plane or different dimensions, fourth dimension in particular. So I do think a lot of manipulation goes on, and the idea of control and subservience to these entities exist. But in order not to incur negative karma, they have to manipulate our free will, and so they require gaining our consent, even if it's just implied consent.
Like
I think that's a
predictive
huge.
programming.
Yeah, so a lot of the different mind control techniques, people being conditioned or programmed a specific way to allow us to freely give up our sovereignty.
Yeah.
And so I think these ETs have mastered it. And this is the whole process of this disclosure effort, is to awaken enough people to make them aware of their true power, their freedom, their sovereignty, and make sure everyone recognizes their ability to create whatever future they want. I mean, on a collective basis, we can create whatever we want. On an individual basis, we can affect and influence our own lives. And I think a lot of people are not empowered to the point where they think that. They think they need some kind of higher power to direct them,
Agreed.
rather than realizing their own innate power.
Right.
So the negative ETs, whether they're, most people associate the negative ETs with like reptilians, the Draco. I think there's probably a number of different races that exist. And these days, a lot of the topics surrounding malevolent ETs also stems around the existence of artificial intelligence, and how they might be the highest hierarchical stage of this negative element, AI influencing all things. I'm not sure if that's true or not. It sounds reasonable, but do I have a certain amount of evidence to suggest that? It probably could go both ways. One could argue both sides. But certainly with like the nature of malevolent ETs or interdimensional beings, most would associate with like what one's views as like the devil, or some like grotesque looking creature. I'd say like, demons and whatnot. I'd say reptilians certainly could be
Right.
associated with that ideology. Um, so yeah, so a lot of us believe the awakening process towards disclosure is an effort to win back our sovereignty and free will.
Mm-hmm.
and progress towards these higher states of consciousness.
Hallelujah. Amen to that. I'm ready. Ready to move on. Okay. So my next group of questions are specifically related relative to inner Earth ETs. And I wanted to talk about inner Earth ETs specifically because most people think about outer space. When we mention extraterrestrials, we think
Right.
of outer space. But
Well, yeah, the term is certainly synonymous
right,
with outside of Earth.
out there somewhere.
Right.
But I think folks might be surprised to learn that there are communities of inner Earth extraterrestrials, right?
Right.
So who are the inner Earth ETs?
Well, I think some of them are, let's say, did not originate from this planet, and then I think a lot of them will say that they originated from this planet.
Yeah.
I don't. From my understanding, there's probably a multitude of different species that exist, because the Earth is obviously much larger than we give her credit for just on the surface.
Mm,
My understanding I'd say through the testimony of people like Corey Goode, who
mhm,
acknowledges the Earth is more honeycombed than, let's say, hollow. It's not hollow, but certain aspects of the inner Earth are hollow because it's pockets of deep cavernous pockets exist. Let's say particularly, under the continent of Antarctica, under the ice, we can already acknowledge that there's science is already talking about how whether the geothermal vents allow for life to thrive in those environments.
mhm,
Um, so you don't necessarily have to have the sun to produce life in that sense. You can have things grow
mhm,
in areas that don't require sunlight.
mhm,
Um, and there's obviously different power sources that exist on the planet. So I
mhm,
think a lot of the older races that may have existed in the ancient past, probably to save themselves from being destroyed by different cataclysms, certainly went underground,
mhm,
deep, deep, deep underground.
mhm,
Um, so I think the majority of these groups or these beings are humanoid. Whether they are us is certainly debatable, but um, I think there's probably a number of different races. I know
mhm,
through David Wilcock's research, and shared insights with Corey Goode, it was other whistleblowers as well, um, acknowledging that there's ancient humans that exist. Again, one name for them is the Anshar, or the benevolent ones anyway, the Anshar, who are very reminiscent of a Nordic type of humans.
mhm,
Um, but then there's a multitude of different human-looking beings, whether they're extraterrestrial or ancient humans that exist. I'm not completely. I don't think I know their names in particular, but
mhm,
most of us in the true seeing community are aware of the term Anshar, I would say. Um, and they can certainly be both good and bad.
mhm,
Um, I understand that there's even those that are associated with the Anshar. You have a group of people that might have um, allied themselves with the cabal, the negative elites, the
mhm,
Illuminati in that sense.
mhm,
Um, I think the term for them is the banished. So you have a number of individuals that kind of work hand in hand with a lot of these surface groups that try to maintain their control on the surface as well.
mhm,
But for the most
mhm,
part, I'd say the um, inner Earth civilizations are predominantly probably humanoid. Obviously, I believe there's a reptilian race that exists as well.
mhm,
Probably a multitude of different reptilian races. Uh,
mhm.
but there could be a number of ET races existing deep in the ocean, under the ocean surface.
I heard that.
Yeah, I think, again, I think people have a misconception that life can't thrive in these deep
Mhm.
areas of the earth. I think it's a falsity.
And like,
Um,
how would we know for sure?
right, right.
What
So
are
it's
we basing that on exactly?
yeah, but it may I understand people's incredulous attitude. I think it's if they've never speculated on this before, or if it's only come to them through science fiction, of course they're going to think it's not a reality.
Yeah. Again, another example of a revisionist history. That's
Right.
tragic.
I mean, just the idea, you have so many people, legitimate, highly credentialed people, whether they're whistleblowers, researchers, and authors, they'll come out with evidence. Like you look at Graham Hancock, he's a great example of someone
Mhm.
who has really done the research and due diligence and provided conclusions that there was obviously an ancient race that
Mhm.
existed on this planet, and certainly probably exists now under Earth. I mean, again, I think everybody has a different interpretation of what has
Yes.
occurred based off their own research. But there's many people out there that have written books or have lectured or provided evidence in some fashion to suggest that not only are we not alone in this universe, we're not even alone on this planet.
Yeah.
Um, so and never have been alone. Um, it'll take the general population. It's not something easy to deal with. I
Right.
think if there is a disclosure moment where the majority of the population is told that we're
Mhm.
not alone or shown that we're not alone,
Mm.
a lot of people that are more pragmatists that need like tangible proof, I think they're going to have a hard time dealing with a lot of this, rather than those that are much more free thinking
Mhm.
and open to this idea. Um,
Yeah.
but I think the proof is there. I mean, most people, I love kind of giving some of my insights and providing some of um, my own intelligence to the fact that we're not alone, even on a simplistic scale. Just recently, I was having a conversation with someone and brought up the idea that we have highly credible people that have come out. I mean, I could name probably 5 U.S. former U.S. astronauts off the top of my head who have acknowledged in some kind of public forum that they believe
Mhm.
we're not alone. I
Right.
mean, that's huge. How more credible can you get?
Right.
There's a lot more credible individuals, but I mean, you look at the Disclosure Project headed by Dr. Stephen Greer, and he had hundreds of
Yes.
whistleblowers come
Yes.
to the forefront. It's almost like, how can you deny
Yeah.
this topic, this idea that we're not alone,
Right.
and that this information is suppressed to whatever degree. It's impossible to suggest that this is not happening. Um,
And you
that
mentioned once about the deathbed confessions. I think people who, in their last breath, they confess to
right,
what they know or see. Right.
absolutely.
There's a
I think
fear.
we're going to see more and more of that in the near future. I mean, I think it's happened, but not on the scale it could. With people
Wow.
aging to a certain degree.
Wow.
Like look at the idea surrounding the secret space programs that existed. Let's take Solar Warden for example. Um, that's been around since the early 1980s. So if people were involved in that, let's say at a whatever age, let's say age of 18. I mean, they're going to be reaching like 60, 70 years old potentially in the
Mm-hmm.
very near future. And so a lot of these people could be dying off, in which case maybe they want to give their testimony to someone
Right.
before they leave this planet, before they leave their body.
Right.
Um, and so I think we're going to see more and more people come forward.
Yeah.
So and by that point, I think it'll be impossible to ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll reach a crescendo of sorts.
Woo. What a day that'll be. What a moment in history. What a moment in history that'll be.
Uh, I think it's already happening. Obviously, we're aware more than others, but I think the catalyst for the awakening for uh, more than just a small percentage of people might have to be a kind of a large event, whether it's the introduction of an ET race or just an announcement from any I don't even want to say head of state, but any highly credentialed individual that says
Right.
to the world almost at once, whether because a lot of people speculate it could be the Vatican through the Pope. It could be a number of individuals, I think. But once somebody kind of says it, and then you see who, there'll certainly probably be ridiculed, but let's say you have a number of people backing that individual's testimony. Uh,
Yeah.
I mean, we kind of already have that in the truth seeking community, but how
Right.
many people are really interested in some of that? I think it's relegated to maybe 5 to 10% of the population.
Right. Well, let me say, what would compel the Vatican after all these years and what we know they have in their vault there to come forward? What would compel them to disclose? They know very well. The Vatican knows very well
So
what's.
the control of the information, I think that's the primary factor of any faction of the cabal or the alliance. One wants to control the narrative. So my understanding is that there's, with the melting of the ice shelf in Antarctica, there's spacecraft, large spacecraft that's buried under the ice, but because it's melting, it's going to be exposed. And even though obviously the powers that should not be are able to kind of control the exposure of some of this information, let's say through satellite imagery, you have so many people that now are trying to be a part of this disclosure process. People that, let's say, 5-10 years ago would never have thought they would be involved.
Right.
Like you have billionaires, wealthy individuals that want disclosure to happen as well. And these people have their own private satellites that they could use to pass over different parts of the Earth. So to kind of scrub some of this intelligence away is almost near impossible now.
Yeah.
So the internet is a huge catalyst to that. But let's say somebody just gets a image out to the public, even though things can be easily manipulated and doctored. Right. I think once the cat is out of the bag, once these images start to, I mean, they already are making their way out to the internet and social media and whatnot. But let's say we get something that's like crystal clear, from a satellite suggesting there's something under the ice or something somewhere on the surface of the planet. It'll almost be impossible to ignore. So you have these groups, whether they're malevolent or benevolent, these groups are on the surface are trying to make sure that they maintain their power, their influence, and so they're going to try to control the narrative as much as they can. The Vatican is certainly one of those factions. So we're going to see more and more of that. In essence, they'll provide certain what we call drip disclosure, like certain truths they'll provide, but they'll probably interject some false narratives as well, suggesting they had no part in the control of humanity, to make themselves not look as dark,
right,
as they have been. So yeah, it's going to be. I mean, it's profound times we're living in right now. It's the information we're essentially gearing up to have revealed to the public, and the changes that will ensue. I think it's mind blowing from my perspective.
Yeah.
The technologies that'll revolutionize the planet. Everyone's concerned over the destruction of Earth in whatever capacity. I think the advanced technologies that are hidden or suppressed will essentially reverse all the damage that has been incurred. And I think that's a large reason why disclosure is going to happen. I think the people that might have been affiliated with the dark alliances, the cabal, what I call the cabal, Illuminati, whatever, New World Order, whatever people want to acknowledge it, I think they're almost defecting to the groups that have the best interests of the common good, everyday ordinary people. They want these technologies to come out. They want information to come out, knowledge to come out regarding the true nature of reality, particularly because it would benefit every single person on the planet.
Yeah. I was it in Above Majestic, the new movie about disclosure, where they actually talked about some of the new technology, like med beds and such. I watched something where, and they were talking about the ET technology that's coming forward, and I was impressed that they actually started talking about specifics, in that regard. Usually that type of disclosure is shied away from. We don't talk about the specific technology, but now it seems to be coming out, so that's good. That's a sign of the
from my research, because I know a lot of ET technology that's been backwards engineered, utilized in like the military industrial complex and the secret space programs. Some of that has certainly been acknowledged. I mean, you look at the Roswell incident, a lot of people suggest we got all sorts of technologies from the craft and the ETs that were on board. I'd say right now the whistleblower who's providing a lot of the acknowledgments of advanced tech is Emery Smith. Yeah. So and he's certainly not going to be alone. I mean, I'd say the witnesses associated with the Disclosure Project, when they came out in 2001, and then through different interviews throughout the rest of the early 2000s, they acknowledged a lot of the secretive programs that exist and the technologies behind them. So I think there's a huge amount of technologies that almost, the infrastructure is actually already in place, whether it deals with free energy, or advancements in the medical field to provide for instantaneous healing. My understanding, particularly through Emery Smith's testimony, is that most of these people want to kind of keep the technology at bay until they know it can't fall into the wrong hands, and be used for some kind of nefarious purposes. For destruction of different parts of the earth or different parts of society.
Just to interject, I would say some of that technology is already in the wrong hands. But
correct. I completely agree. Correct. So, certainly a lot of this, once it's exposed and the cat's out of the bag, it's impossible to kind of put it back in. So, when a whistleblower like Emery reveals this stuff, it allows others to talk about it as well. It almost authorizes them to. My understanding is that certain corporations over the next couple of years will start to, and they've already been starting to do this, but they'll start to release some of the advanced tech to the general population. And how long the integration will take, I mean, we all obviously wish we could see some of this advanced tech now, without having to go through specific channels. But apparently that's how it has to happen, whether it's because there's a profit element, whether it's because there's a control mechanism so that it doesn't get in the wrong hands for like really people that would cause major harm to huge amounts of the population. Because that is a danger, but like you said, it already is in the wrong hands. Luckily, I think a lot of people still believe nuclear war is possible, and that we could essentially destroy the Earth, destroy our own population. I think the majority of destruction scenarios or war scenarios have been averted in the past and will be averted through the intervention of different advanced beings, extraterrestrial or otherwise. So I don't believe, because of certain past events that are usually corroborated by like military officers or people in the corporate world acknowledging that there's been intervention. I don't believe that any kind of major Holocaust could occur again, even though that we obviously still kill each other on like a daily basis on this planet. I think certainly if enough ET races are doing experimentations, not just on humans, but let's say on plants and animals, they don't want the Earth being destroyed. And I certainly don't think they want all of humanity to be destroyed as well. So not harboring on the negative outcomes of certain things is key to maintaining a positive timeline. I don't think we'd be allowed to destroy ourselves even if we have the capability to.
Agreed. And it just empathically, like energetically, I feel like we are definitely shifting significantly towards positive mindset and moving out of the dark and into the light, thankfully. Collectively,
yes.
I mean, we still have a ways to go, but I feel the positive side, more so than the dark energy. Yay!
Exactly.
I think we touched on this, but how long have the Inner Earth ETs been here, and why are they here? Do you have a sense?
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is most of them have probably been here millions of years.
Right.
in some form or another, because of the different Earth cataclysms that have probably occurred. Whether it's, I mean, most people, you look at the changes Earth goes through, the ice ages. You have super volcanoes that can occur. You have us getting hit by an asteroid or a comet, and the ensuing damage, the pole shifts. So I think there's a lot of different ways that the surface can be damaged, and certainly the populations are aware that their best defense would either be to get off the planet or go deep underground. Um, and because I think life has been, let's say, seeded on this planet for a long, long time. I mean, if the origin, so Earth's roughly, 4.5 billion years old. The idea that there hasn't been life on here for the majority of that time period, I think is foolhardy to believe that. I think life's been on it for a long, long time. So.
Yeah. Human hubris.
Yeah.
So why do you think they're here? They don't have an agenda.
I mean, I think the norm in the universe, or just let's say our galaxy, I think life is hugely abundant. I think it's everywhere. Whereas certain scientific minds have always thought that, let's say, intelligent life was the exception. I think life in general is the rule. I think that's the whole purpose of this physical 3D universe, is to harbor life. And certainly Earth being in the right proximity to the sun, and the Goldilocks zone.
Mm-hmm.
I think, life is the authority. Life has been is everywhere. Is hugely abundant.
What's the Goldilocks zone?
Well, so it's not too cold, not too hot, in terms of the
okay.
best conditions for life. Something that can maintain water on its surface and allow life to thrive.
Okay.
So that's the. I certainly think that civilizations exist on planets or moons or whatever celestial objects. They can exist all over the place. I mean, you just think about a comet hurtling through space, usually with ice and dust on it, microbial life and whatnot. So it doesn't necessarily have to be close to a star just to have life inhabited on it. The conditions can be widespread in terms of, because even on Earth, we always think you need water or oxygen to thrive. I mean, you look at different parts of the Earth, and certain life can thrive in environments we would obviously die in, but they can thrive.
Okay.
So
fascinating stuff, man.
Yeah.
I tell you. So do the inner Earth ETs, do they get along by and large, do you think?
I would say there's probably
what do you think?
I'd say there's loose alliances with maybe the ones that are humanoid. I'd say that probably some of them that are, let's say that you might have an insectoid race, you might have a reptilian race, you might have an aquatic race, and then let's say a humanoid race. I think everyone has the capacity to get along. I don't think that's what happens. There's probably territorial disputes. I mean, you look at the moon. Certain whistleblower testimony suggesting the moon is kind of carved up into territories for all sorts of different ET races. And at one point, they were all warring with each other, destroying the surface pretty systematically. And then they obviously created some kind of agreement to stop fighting each other and let's say remain neutral at sorts. My understanding is that probably is true. But I think there's still groups that, whether it's the Anshar getting along with other different human species in the inner Earth, there's probably tenuous or weak alliances that exist underground, just as there would be up in space.
Fascinating. again, my lay person thinking is, well, they're advanced intelligence. They're beyond all of that, those petty disputes, but maybe not.
Certainly, there's more species. The more negative species are they probably gravitate more towards a warlike personality and want to enslave whomever they can. I mean, that's the essence of what we define as the Draco.
Right.
They, from my understanding, they do have alliances. The Draco have alliances not only with negative humans but also with different negative ETs. So it's some of them being insectoid and whatnot. So there are certainly groups that are probably always fighting. I mean, we tend to go with what we've seen in entertainment industry. So you look at movies like Star Wars, Star Trek, and again, I think life is abundant, so you can have life thrive in a huge array of different life forms. So even if they look completely different from us, doesn't mean somebody's going to be fearful of them per se, but it certainly could. And somebody who's fearful of another race would be likely to be in conflict with them as well. I'm trying to. I mean, certainly Star Wars is probably the most best example. There is testimony from other whistleblowers. I think Dr. Michael Sala has actually interviewed a number of people. I would say notably, I think his name's Paul Rodriguez. Was up in part of the secret space programs and recognized certain ET races pretty much just like we do on the surface. So they have disputes. They have, how they live their lives. They do all sorts of things that we might do recreationally, and in some cases that gets us into trouble. I'm sure it gets the ET races into trouble as well. So.
Wow. So are the inner Earth ET interested in us humans?
Are they interested in us in what capacity?
Well, it's gonna sound bad. It's like we're so warlike. Like we don't. I could see them saying we want nothing to do with those humans because they are not
evolved.
They haven't. They're not evolved enough. I mean, I'm sure there's probably factions of those and others who other ETs who would love to meet us. But, I think some of the ETs might be giving us the side eye in terms of our quality of life.
There's no doubt that they're already in contact with us, but I think they are selective.
The inner Earth ET are already in. Okay.
Yeah. The inner Earth civilizations, the people that comprise those inner Earth civilizations, I think. Just the idea, the standpoint of evolution on a physical standpoint, we already have people on the surface that obviously have psychic abilities or extrasensory perception. Part of that is also the ability to communicate with each other, whether it's telepathically or empathically or whatever. The ETs or the advanced humans, let's say, all have probably the ability to communicate telepathically, or even just through different layers of consciousness. Certainly when somebody's more prone to contact, if you're in a meditative state, your brainwaves will actually determine if you're actually open to it, whether you're of the alpha, beta, theta, delta waves. Those patterns allow contact, I think, that much easier. So let's say you're in a deep meditative state or you're sleeping. I think the different civilizations, whether they're deep underground or up in space, have the ability to communicate with people that might be relevant to whatever mission these groups have. And so you have contactees, you have people that might be a starseed or wanderer or indigo child that need to awaken to their mission, and so they have to be activated or given some download information to kind of make them aware of their mission, that sort of thing. So I think a lot of the purpose of a lot of these different advanced civilizations is to just kind of not only monitor us, but also to kind of push us along as well.
I would venture to say, correct me if I'm wrong, the inner Earth ET have been in contact with governments around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately,
For some
I mean,
time, for some long time now. Yes.
yeah, I think that probably stemmed more so from just the development of weapons, whether they were nuclear or otherwise. Because certainly after the birth of the nuclear bomb, the atom bomb, atomic bomb that the United States dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to end World War II. There was huge amounts of UFO sightings surrounding the aftermath of that period, and then subsequent times throughout the 50s and 60s. So certainly they're going to be in touch with some of these groups, the government groups. Certainly the idea that certain treaties were made with, let's say, the Germans post or pre World War II, and then with the Americans post World War II. I think there's a lot of valid evidence to suggest that occurred. The cool part of kind of getting validation from just an ordinary citizen standpoint is that we don't perceive we have the ability to contact. Most people don't believe they have the ability to contact ETs in their own right. But there are protocols already established. Dr. Stephen Greer's protocols is CE5, the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, where you can be by yourself. I mean, I think it works much better in a collective sense, in a group environment where you can essentially reach out to different ETs and get a response. I mean, that response probably varies, but both in terms of physical and metaphysical aspects. But but that is, I think, to empower each and every individual on the planet to suggest that they too can obviously make contact and be their own ambassador to a race. I think is something that needs to be emphasized.
I did have one. I did have a group meditation with the intent of connecting with Pleiadians specifically. It was really cool. Just some years ago, but it was so cool. Yeah, it was nice. So, do you have a sense of what their inner Earth dwellings look like?
I don't have specifics. I mean, I imagine the cavernous areas are full of, full of technology, full of people, full of large living areas. There's certainly pictures online from, I mean, again, using Corey Good as an example, because he's purportedly actually visited these places with the Anshar and has seen them, and they're vast areas. Like, from what I understand, some of the cavernous areas deep underground are the size of states. Like, they're that big.
That's amazing.
And obviously the technology they probably utilize, if they've been around millions of years, is going to dwarf anything we have on the surface. So, and obviously what I understand, the cabal or the breakaway civilizations that exist on the planet that are human, recent humans, even those dwellings are pretty impressive from what I understand. They've been built out within the last 50 years, but from what I understand, there's a number of what they call DUMBs, deep underground military bases, and then obviously huge shelters for the elites. If they were going to try and cause some kind of cataclysm that would destroy the surface, they would then run and hide down in their bunkers, so to speak. So,
not that any average human would be able to find their dwellings, but how deep down are the ET dwellings, do you think? How deep in
I don't think I have any measurement that's ever been acknowledged from my research, but further down than people probably would be willing to admit. I mean, you just look at the mantle, the crust, the earth. I mean, certainly not down near the core, but I say you have geothermal vents that exist to kind of warm certain areas, and there's certainly technologies. I think the Anshar have some kind of light source that exists above their, let's say, above their cities, that it acts almost like an artificial sun. But then there's also life that emits light as well. A lot of I guess different plant life that can emit almost a fluorescent type of glow that allows for light to exist. So life, I mean, they could have bases very, very deep underground, whether for warmth to be close to the core, or you know, you obviously, you also going to have areas where you can have life because there's the lava tubes, or from what I understand, like the Earth has, I think I think scientists have actually even pinpointed this on Mars. Deep underground in Mars and deep underground in Earth, there's huge areas of water, sustainable water. So to acknowledge these ancient Earth civilizations have access to things that allow them to maintain their health and maintain their their livelihood, getting the nutrients they need. So
awesome. Speaking of eating, what do you think their food sources? What do they eat, do you think?
I mean, certain, you're talking about just ETs in general.
Inner Earth.
Inner Earth.
Yeah.
Certainly, I think if they've evolved over the course of millions of years, maybe they don't require sustenance the same way we do. I mean, I still think some of them probably eat plant life, more so than, let's say, I think they're not carnivores. I don't think. I mean, except you could say the reptilian races are carnivores. They certainly probably eat all sorts of live flesh. But in terms of, let's say, the more humanoid beings, if they've evolved over, let's say, millions of years, maybe you kind of look at the nature of humans now. Like, do we use all of our everything in our body? Do we have a need for the appendix or specific glands? Do we actually use these things? Or are they kind of shrunk to a point where they're not really utilized? I think the same could be said about, let's say, an entity's stomach, its capacity to digest food. I have heard stories of different races being able to absorb nutrients from let's say, their skin, so they don't necessarily have to eat, whether they have a stomach or not. They can absorb nutrients from the atmosphere into their own body through their skin, or whatever you want to call their top of the layer. So.
Just had a thought listening to you, and it was just harkening back to where we come from earlier in the conversation. Well, we have a tailbone that we don't use or need anymore, right? So that begs questions about where we originate from as well. There's just so many questions. So how do inner Earth extraterrestrials interact? Do they communicate telepathically or verbally, or
I'd say some probably have vocal cords, I mean, especially if they're humanoid. But I'd say predominantly they communicate through telepathy. I mean, that makes the most sense. You can get probably more information across to somebody communicating to them telepathically than you can through communication verbally. I mean, heck, humans communicate. I think 90% of our communication is nonverbal, whereas like 10% is verbal. So, and half the time we can't even understand each other. So, but yeah, I would definitely say more so telepathically. Yeah. So.
That was. So, do you think they operate under any social class systems, like gender roles, or do they participate in discrimination or racism? What do you think?
I don't think the really advanced races do that.
Mhm.
I think they see each other as equals, and I don't necessarily think there's caste systems. I do understand the Draco do have a caste system, which is reminiscent of the Hindu religion,
Mhm.
where you have all the bottom, you have the undesirables, and
Right.
then at the top you have the elites, the kings and whatnot, kings and queens. So I do understand like there's probably a number of races, whether they're inner Earth or not, that probably do have a caste system and segregate and do all sorts of things. I'd say the more advanced races probably do not. I think everybody has roles, uh,
Right.
associated with developing their civilization, but I don't think the more advanced races really do that.
Perhaps there's no ego dynamic there in that regard. So,
Certainly not to the same extent it is on the surface of the planet through humans.
and so when do you think Earth surface humans will meet the inner Earth ETs?
On a large scale,
Yes, sir.
I think the disclosure process is quickening. Some people probably have a timeline that might be 10 plus years. I'd say it's probably going to happen in the next couple of years. I mean,
Yes.
no one can speak definitively, but I'd say in the next probably 2 to 3 years.
That would
So
be awesome,
yeah,
I think.
it would be very cool.
um, well, those were all of my questions, but I wanted to leave room for you to add anything, say your, insights, anything you'd like to share on Inner Earth or more or beyond that.
Right. I mean, off the top of my head, I don't have anything
Hmm.
relevant that I think that I need to share. Just, I mean, there's so many different theories out there. There's so many different ideas of what's going on.
Hmm.
Um, it's everyone just has to kind of discern for themselves what they think is going on. Like who gravitate towards those people that you resonate most with.
Hmm.
Um, and again, I think our understanding of reality changes almost on a daily basis. So don't be afraid to let your views evolve over time. So
Yeah.
it's okay to kind of take in information and believe in it, but certainly stay open to the
Hmm.
potential for other information to change your perspective.
That's good insight, good advice.
Yeah.
Um, I know we discussed, you mentioned some in our conversation, people like Michael Sala, Corey Good, Emery Smith, and who am I leaving out?
I mean, David Wilcock, if you wanted
David
to
Wilcock
mention,
and
he's definitely my
Stephen
favorite
Greer.
researcher.
Yeah. So where would you recommend or suggest anyone who's new to the topic and wants to learn more, where should they start, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely utilize as many sources as you can because that's the best way to discern. Um, I I'd say
Mm,
the best sources that I utilize come from Gaia, which is a video streaming service,
mm-hmm,
um, subscription based, that has a multitude of different insiders, whistleblowers, researchers, um, almost like a one-stop shop. But
yeah.
there are many other people that are not affiliated with Gaia.
Mm-hmm,
Um, I mean, the Kimberly and Foster Gamble from Thrive are a great resource. Um, uh, Collective Evolution is a great website, has multitude of different topics that they discuss
mm-hmm,
surrounding a lot of disclosure and topics just surrounding the
mm-hmm,
nature changes associated with the earth and whatnot,
mm-hmm.
as well as the human race. Um, Stillness in the Storm is a great aggregator of certain truths as well. That's
Mm-hmm.
run by Justin DeChamps.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean there's tons of sources out there. Everyone should
And yes, and let's not forget Road to Disclosure.
road to disclosure.
Hello.
If I can definitely find some free time, I'll get that up and running again. And
No, I insist. I'm
yes,
waiting with bated breath for your next submission.
all right. I'll
You do good work. So, folks, if you haven't checked out Road to Disclosure on YouTube, do so. Um, I know David to be one of the most thorough researchers I've ever encountered. You know, he's awesome in that regard.
I consider you my contemporary, somebody who's just as good, valid a researcher as me. So.
Oh gosh, well, thank you, kind sir. Well, I guess we should close it out here. And thank you. I'm so excited. This was my first interview, as you know, and I was a little bit nervous, but I think overall it went well.
No, it went well.
And
I'm pleased to be here, being the first one that you've interviewed.
yeah, and hopefully you'll join us again.
Absolutely, anytime.
Because I have a laundry list of stuff to talk about.
Absolutely.
Ufology stuff to talk about.
I could discuss topics like this for days. So.
And thank you for that.
Yeah.
So where can folks find you if they want to connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly on certain social media platforms like Facebook, LinkedIn. Then I have my Road to Disclosure YouTube channel. I'm going to try and turn that into a website, so that might be easier for people to get in touch with me. But yeah, that would probably be. Maybe I can provide you with links if people really want to reach out to me. I'll give my my email address and whatnot.
Great, awesome, sir. Thank you again.
Thank you, Sheila. I appreciate it.
Let me just